Welcome back. We are continuing with Going Native, written by Uncle Sealing. Going Native, Chapter 6.
Sammy pulled Marin down the hallway, both of their small hands wrapping around a single one of Marin's. The little human was moving quickly, but a nearly 75-centimeter height difference meant that the Shilvati still had to walk at an uncomfortably short gait. As the two approached a large set of double doors, Sammy came to a sudden stop. Marin, caught off guard, stumbled a little as she slammed into Sammy from behind. Sammy and Marin both let out a little yelp at the collision, but Marin instinctively threw out her arms, grasping the tiny human to stop them from falling. Sammy tried to turn and point at small closet door next to the double doors, but they could barely move in the tight embrace. Marin noticed with a little shock that she had one hand covering Sammy's face, pressing their head back and wedging it between her breasts.
Oh! Sorry!
Marin let out, face turning dark with embarrassment. Sammy didn't say anything, just gave Marin a quick smile and opened the closet. Hanging on pegs in the inside were several white lab coats and one apron. Marin tried and failed to politely look away as Sammy slipped off their apron and put on a coat. After looking over the coats in the closet, Marin looked back at Sammy. They looked adorable in the baggy coat, sleeves clearly just a slightly too wide and the pockets on the sides looking almost ridiculously oversized. Embroidered over the chest pocket was Sammy in rainbow thread, a small sunburst over the eye.
Do I have to wear one? I don't think any will fit me.
Sammy let out a light, musical laugh.
No way. Sam just has a no nudity in the planetarium rule.
They made finger quotes as they spoke.
He says it's disrespectful to the science, but I think he just doesn't want to have to deal with butt prints on the couches.
With that, Sammy threw the doors open.
Welcome to my favorite place in the whole world.
The room was a dome, 15 meters across. In the center was a circular dais, a ring of desks and computer monitors with Samuel standing in the middle, pecking away at a keyboard. Surrounding the center in interrupted rings were couches and chairs, one or two seats with little tables separating them and radial aisles like spokes providing access. The entire dome was smooth and white, all of the lighting in the room coming from lights mounted in the floor.
Come on, let's find a seat.
Sammy grabbed Marin's hand and pulled her along again, picking a small, high-backed couch. Once Marin sat down, Sammy made some pushing motions to one side and squeezed in next to the alien, snuggling up tight. Marin could feel her ears burning, her entire face flushed a deep purple as this tiny human kept her off balance. She felt even more off balance when Sammy leaned over and pulled a lever on the side of the couch. The whole thing reclined backwards, a pad swinging forward to catch her legs as Marin suddenly found herself on her back, staring up at the ceiling. Glancing to her side, Marin found those large green eyes behind thick lenses staring at her, an infectious ear-to-ear grin as Sammy pointed at the ceiling.
Watch.
As Marin turned her head back to look, the dome vanished. Though they didn't advertise it, Sammy was pretty sure that Painter Planetarium's 350 square meter dome screen was perhaps the single most advanced piece of theater equipment in the world. Samuel, of course, had done most of the work. While Sammy prided themselves on being the heart of the business, their name was on the sign. After all, Samuel worked the technical side of things. Almost everything in the building was built in-house and, while Sammy had designed the main optics of the telescopes and had done their fair share creating the museum displays, Samuel was the one soldering PCBs or writing code until the early hours. Sammy wasn't quite sure how he managed to do it, But once the fighting was over and the Shilvati had started building permanent settlements, Samuel had started his quest. He had called in favors. Sami could swear that Sam had done work for nearly every person, company, or three-letter agency at some point, networked with anybody in the new Shil government he could get a hold of, and finally disappeared for a week, returning with their little bus stuffed with surplus Shilvati optics and display hardware. After that was a month when Sami spent the nights alone in an empty bed while Samuel caught occasional naps on a couch and pulled 20-hour days. The result, as Sami was proud to point out to anybody who would listen, was totally worth it. Some of the highest quality optical hardware the human race had ever produced, coupled with advanced Shilvati sensors and image processing, and the observatory's telescopes were as good or better than anything on the planet. And the planetarium. Samuel had really outdone himself with the planetarium. He used the same basic projector design but modified it to use more efficient, high-resolution Shilvati display modules. Coupled with an impressive software array, the dome could display at a far higher resolution than the human eye could even detect, with perfect color saturation and contrast. There was still a little distortion near the base of the dome, but software compensation helped some, and who was going to look down there anyway when you could look up and see the universe? More than watching the dome, though, Sami loved to watch the look on people's faces when they saw it. Snuggled in close, Sami was gratified to see that the effect worked just as well on a Shilvati. Merin seemed stunned as the dome snapped away and they were looking up at the sky. Samuel started in on his presentation, the thin wire of a headset microphone making his normally quiet voice blast through the speaker system.
This is the sky right now, as seen through some cameras looking from the top of the dome. What I am going to do now is switch us over to the display from the telescope.
The view faded out, then in on a much tighter view of the sky.
Adding in some contrast adjustment and amplification.
The blue of the sky dimmed, revealing the faint points of stars. Sami startled Merin when they spoke directly into the woman's ear.
When did they tell you the accident happened?
They didn't give me an exact time or anything.
Merin pulled out her data pad and started flipping through notes.
Sometime before 2200, 2 days ago. That's when the Interior Agent's shuttle left the station.
Samuel hit a couple of keys, and thin lines appeared in the sky, each with a dot and a number next to it.
Here are the human and Shilvati satellites that we know about. Unless the space station your husband was on was steel-fed somehow, it should be on the list.
The sky began to move, slowly pulsing lighter and darker as Samuel began to turn back time.
Now, keep in mind this is all extrapolation. It's not a real image, just a simulation based on the orbital velocities, and here we go.
The sky was dark and littered with stars. The Milky Way was bright and lay across the sky like spilled ink. Lines crisscrossed the display. A few keystrokes and a clock appeared, displaying 22 o'clock. A few more and most of the thin lines vanished.
There, just cut out all of the human satellites and space junk we track.
Slowly, the clock began to count down. At 20:37, a dot appeared on one of the lines at the very edge of the projection, a little tag with a serial number after floating alongside it. By 2010 the dot had slid past, moving backwards through time. It never passed through the center of the screen, its arc slicing a third of the circular dome. Samuel ran time forward again until the clock read 2020 and the dot was prominent.
Well, there it is. Something likely happened at that space station in this 27-minute window.
He looked over at Merin and the tears leaking from her eyes as she stared at the screen. He frowned in sympathy.
Can I ask what story they gave you?
Slowly, haltingly, Merin gave the official explanation about the rip in the station's hull and it venting atmosphere. As she talked, Sammy adjusted the couch so the three could see each other clearly. The massive Shilvati and the tiny human still cuddled up tight. By the time Marin was done, both of the Sams were shaking their heads emphatically. Sammy spoke first.
That isn't what happened.
Marin's head snapped over to look at them so quickly that one of her tusks caught Sammy in the cheek before they had a chance to pull away. Sammy covered the side of their face with one hand, scooting back from the alien as Marin grabbed Sammy by the shoulders and shouted.
What happened? Tell me what happened.
She only stopped when she noticed the small trickle of bright red blood dripping between Sammy's fingers and the terrified look on the human's face. The two stared at each other in silence.
I'll get the first aid kit.
The voice boomed out of the speakers and knocked Marin and Sammy out of their shock. The Shilvati's face, at first flushed in excitement, drained of color as she realized what had happened. She let go of the human with numb fingers.
It's too small.
Sammy let out in a quiet voice, still holding their face with one hand as a thick drop of red slid down their dark skin like a tear.
If the accident happened like you said, we wouldn't be able to see it from here. There wouldn't be a reason to come and get the data. They lied to you.
Samuel booked it, sliding out from under the desks and heading for the small closet near the planetarium entrance. He snatched the first aid kit and his apron. Maybe if he was fast enough. He wasn't. Even as he made his way back into the dome, he could hear Sammy taking quick, shallow breaths. They were staring at their hands, at the red smear covering their palm.
Sammy. Sam. Look at me.
He said firmly, tucking the apron into his armpit to free a hand and gently guiding their head until the two were eye to eye.
Come on, you can do it. Eyes on me.
He spared a quick glance over at the large Shilvati, the look of confusion tinged with fear plain on her face.
Sam, stay with me, there you go.
He continued to talk to her, but her breathing was quickly turning into hyperventilating and she was starting to squeeze her eyes shut.
No, come on, look at me.
Still facing Sammy, the man spoke to Marin.
I need you to hold Sammy's hands and get them to look you in the eyes. Keep them distracted.
What is going on?
Panic attack. It'll be okay, I just need help.
Marin nodded and cautiously took Sammy's hands in her own. As Sammy started to look down, Samuel grabbed their chin and turned Sammy's head to look Marin in the face.
Talk to them. Tell a story or something.
About?
Anything, just talk nice and even. Hold Sam's attention.
Samuel let go of Sammy's chin and quickly threw the apron over the joined hands. With a hand free, he opened the first aid kit and started digging through it. As Samuel tore open a wipe and started cleaning off the blood, Marin started talking. He tuned it out and took a look. The tusk wasn't particularly sharp, leaving a scratch diagonally from the temple to just under Sammy's eye. Unfortunately, it looked like the tip had dug in when it got over the cheekbone, leaving a gouge and some torn skin. Nothing serious, just messy. Some antibiotic ointment, a couple butterfly bandages, a fold of gauze, and some tape took care of stopping the blood and covering it up. Samuel then took some more wipes and cleaned Sammy's face and chin, throwing each wipe into the medical case as he went. There wasn't much blood, but they had managed to smear it quite a bit. It was only when Samuel had his hands under the apron using the last of his wipes to clean Sammy and Marin's hands that he started to pay the pair's one-sided conversation any attention. It was actually rather interesting. Marin was talking about data structures and how the dome could be used for visualizations of complicated datasets. He would have to remind her to tell Sammy the whole thing again once they were actually listening. With a flourish, He removed the apron and folded it up. There wasn't a single spot of blood visible anywhere.
All done, dear, you can look now.
He said gently, kissing Sammy on the forehead. Their head dropped, looking at those small brown hands, and after a few minutes Sam's breathing had calmed down. They looked confused and disoriented, but the worst was over.
Thanks for the help.
Samuel said, offering Marin a high five. She looked at his hand for a moment, then gently slapped her large hand against his smaller one. The Shilvati then leaned over cautiously, whispering over Sammy's head.
What just happened?
She asked, brows furrowed in concern.
I didn't mean to hurt.
It's okay.
Came the tiny voice.
I'm okay.
Sammy sounded a bit stunned and looked exhausted. Their face was pale and those emerald eyes had lost their shine. Sammy sounded a bit stunned and looked exhausted. Their face was pale and those emerald eyes had lost their shine.
What you need?
Samuel said, giving them a pat on the head.
Is a nap. Come on.
He grabbed Sammy by the wrist and pulled them up to their feet. When they started to sway, large purple hands caught, and then lifted. Samuel led the way as Marin carried Sammy cradled in her arms. The little human weighed almost nothing to Marin. As Samuel led the way, she saw that the one called Sammy was already asleep, head lolling to use one of her tits as a pillow. This whole day had started crazy and only gotten crazier. She had accidentally hurt one of the humans helping her look for her husband, and now here they were leading her to their bedroom. The pair seemed to live above the kitchen area she had visited. The stairs were uncomfortably shallow, but once she got to the top she found the ceilings higher than her little basement room, and the whole apartment was more spacious than she had expected. It was one large room, lined with bookcases messily stuffed with models, toys, board games, and even some actual books. Furniture seemed haphazardly placed, but the middle of the room was dominated by a bed, if you wanted to call it that. It was a mattress that would have been generous by Shilvati standards, lying on the floor and surrounded by pillows and blankets to expand the area even farther. Samuel gestured at the bed.
You can set Sam down, I'll take it from here.
Will they? Is everything okay?
Yeah, don't worry about it. I'll meet you downstairs.
So Marin sat at the kitchen table where she started her day, with new information but no idea what she could use it for. So the interior had lied about what happened on the space station. They probably had their reasons, and prodding the sleeping Toroks like that would just get her in serious trouble. She just couldn't shake the feeling that, whatever happened, Ieng was still alive somewhere. She looked up as she heard scraping from the stove. Samuel was there, wearing grey slacks and a button-down shirt the color of eggshells, shaking the saucepan that had been left to cool.
I don't think the hot chocolate is salvageable, but do you want something? I am thinking scotch myself.
That sounds great, actually.
Marin had never had scotch, but she could hold her own with red grail, and she knew it was well regarded by the soldiers she normally interacted with. With how crazy the last 3 days had been, she really needed a drink. Samuel returned and sat down 2 tumblers, each with a few cubes of ice and 2 fingers of dark liquid.
What a day, eh?
Is Sammy okay? I didn't think they were that hurt, it was an accident.
Marin started, but Sam raised a hand and she stopped.
An irrationally strong fear that causes an involuntary nervous response. Sam sees blood and they just kind of shut down.
He shrugged.
They'll be fine in an hour or 2. You did a fantastic job helping, by the way.
Samuel gave what Marin thought was a cute and genuine smile, his skin crinkling around his eyes as he reached out with one slender hand and squeezed her own.
We both really appreciate it.
Can I ask another question?
Samuel nodded.
Why is your bed on the floor?
Samuel flushed scarlet, then started rolling up a pant leg to reveal a long, twisting surgical scar.
Sammy and I were getting a bit, well.
If anything, he got redder. Marin noticed idly that his ears turned as bright as his face when he blushed. It was kind of cute.
We sometimes get a bit athletic in the bedroom. I fell off the bed and my leg got hooked on the frame. Compound fracture of the tibia. We ended up throwing out the old bed. It has been almost 2 years and Sammy still won't let me get a new one. Whenever I suggest it, they just add another pillow to the pile.
He rolled down his pant leg and sat back up, trying to regain some composure. The two sat and looked at one another, each taking a sip of their scotch in quiet contemplation. Marin tried not to let herself wince at the smoky, burnt taste, but it must have shown as Samuel gave her a little grin.
So?
He looked at her.
So, what?
So how long would you like to stay with us?
Marin sputtered, coughing as she nearly inhaled half of her scotch.
You two humans really seem to have a knack for keeping me off balance. Why would you even want me here, especially after, you know?
She waved a hand up towards the apartment.
Well, a few reasons, the biggest one being that Sam likes you. That counts for a lot. I like you too, which is almost as important. The other thing is that, well, you brought us a mystery. We've been so bored out here. We were talking about shutting this place down and getting real jobs, but the two of us are all wrapped up in this. This place is us.
And you think you can help figure out what happened to Ian?
She could feel hope starting to bubble up. She knew Ian was alive, and with help maybe she could get him back. Samuel grinned.
I have a few ideas we can try, but it will take some work. I could use a set of big strong hands to help.
Sammy's petite bare feet pattered across the tiles of the kitchen floor as they made their way towards the coffee maker. Their jaw cracker of a yawn stopped the conversation at the table. Once the percolator was, well, percolating, it was time to address the pair.
I can't believe you put me in the ducky pajamas when we have a guest.
Sammy put their hands on their hips and glared at Samuel. He looked them up and down, all 5 feet of dark skin and bright eyes in Robin's egg blue pajamas with little yellow rubber duckies all over them.
Hey, you could have changed. Marin never would have seen how adorable you look.
Sammy let out a theatrical groan.
But that means more laundry.
It's not even your turn to do the laundry. I think you just like to complain.
I mean, yeah. Complaining is great.
They turned towards Marin.
How long are you staying? I need to go into town and get groceries and I want to make sure I get enough.
Marin gave the pair a small smile, golden eyes glittering.
I didn't agree to stay yet.
Of course you are staying, Sam.
Samuel looked over some of the rough drawings and quick penciled math that littered the table. He and Marin had been going over a few options.
At least 3 days. That's when we'll have our best window.
Sammy brightened.
I'll get enough for a week, just in case.
End of chapter. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, and visit the author, and I'll see you next time. If you didn't, comment on what I can do better. And as usual, have a wonderful day.